I love the idea of bringing your worth. Holly touched on it yesterday. Some of y'all touched on it in the conversations. I think it's so important to bring your worth, but first you have to know what your worth is. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Thinking about today, I was thinking a lot about a quote from Brene Brown, one of my favorite authors. She says, you either stand in your story and own it, or you stand outside of your story and you hustle for your worth. That's deep, right? Now, I used to live in Silicon Valley, and so we talk about hustle as far as hustling for attention, hustling for the next dollar, hustling for your startup. But what's deep is that that's not what she's talking about. She's talking about hustling for who you are. But that's our born gift, right? You were born and you've created a story. Your story is in your voice. Your story is in your POV. Your story is in your heart. Your story is even in your trauma. To quote Leonard Cohen, that's the cracks are where the light comes in, right? But you might have a story, but it doesn't mean that you own your story. Those are two separate things. Here's my story. I'm a supporter of solopreneurs, side hustlers, what I call non-traditional entrepreneurs. And I'm the primary caregiver of a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. They're both boys. They're both really active. They both drive my wife and I crazy, so they keep our life rich. And I'm here supporting y'all and able to support them by doing this. But I didn't always own my story. Now, I've been a journalist and full-time freelance writer it's my 21st year, but I was freelance writing before that. So that I always owned. I've been a writer since I was my youngest kid's age. However, about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I didn't own my story. About 8 years ago, I became a dad. Again, my son is about to turn 8. I became a dad at the exact same time I became an entrepreneur. My wife went back to work. She has a traditional job. And it was me and my 4-month-old son. And we're just looking at each other like, what the hell do we do now? Because I don't have any stepkids. I don't have any experience. At that same time, I'm doing my first startup called So Quotable, which actually is about capturing people's quotes. Right? This is about 2013, 2014. You can share the quote on Twitter, stuff like that. I ended up bootstrapping it, which meant I paid for it myself, no outside investment, programmed the whole thing, definitely DIY. Shout out to Gabrielle. And did the DIY approach. And as I created that got the attention of TED. That led to my first TED Talk. When I was on the TED stage, then that led to me connecting with a friend of a friend, a couple connections away. And he and a colleague of his were actually working on a startup called Cuddler, which connected people for hugs. Again, it's 2014, so it's like Tinder, Grindr, any type of hookup culture. We want to do a platonic version of that. And as I'll get into later, I'm really into technology and understanding sexuality and how people connect. So this is like, peanut butter and jelly. And I was like, yes, I'll join. I became a co-founder. We blew up really quickly. It was right after my son's first birthday. We had 250,000 users. We were on the late night talk shows and the morning shows. You can look up CUDDLR on Google and you'll see like the mess of stuff that was happening at the same time. And again, I'm still the primary caregiver of our first son. So a peak moment for me was my son was probably about 18 months old and the Wall Street Journal calls. So it's like the number one, newspaper in America, in my opinion. Remember, I'm a journalist. I have a master's in magazine publishing. I'm a journalism nerd. I've been writing for these publications, not for WSJ, but for other publications, but I've never been covered by them. So it's almost like being a vocal coach and then suddenly you're on the stage at the Apollo, right? It's like, whoa, hold on a second. So it was a very big moment for us and for me as a co-founder of this popular app. Again, my son was about 18 months old and I can't remember, probably because they're taking up so much of my space in my brain. That's what kids do. I can't remember if it was a gastrointestinal thing he had, or if it was diarrhea, or maybe he was potty training. I can't remember, but there was poop involved. Try to keep it PG for Sunday morning. There was poop involved. And that's when she called. And I'm on the phone with her, ended up being a really cool conversation. Talked for like 20 minutes, really nice reporter. The story ended up turning out fine, ended up becoming a cover story. And that, rocketed us back up to the #1 app in several countries. And while that's happening, forget the PG, I'm cleaning up shit. That's the short version of it. And I got the phone with her, and I just felt one feeling: shame. I felt shame. You know, I'm pretty sure Elon Musk wasn't cleaning up poop when he was on CNBC. I'm pretty sure the late Steve Jobs, who was around when I was in Silicon Valley, you know, wasn't taking his kids to school and dealing with, projectile vomit or whatever, things that you deal with when you're the primary caretaker, when you're primary caregiver. I'm sure he wasn't dealing with that. I am an imposter. What the hell am I doing? Remember, my background is journalism. So I've been an entrepreneur only for like a year and a half. And suddenly I'm on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Suddenly we have the #1 app in America and all around the world. This felt incongruent. And most importantly, which I want you to hear, there was no one else who was doing this. There were no beautiful pregnant women on the cover of Inc. magazine, who I'll write for later. But that hadn't happened yet. There weren't guys who were saying, okay, this is how we represent for parenthood, and we can have a stable career that creates and nourishes the world. They weren't around. I felt like I was one of one. Therefore, I had nothing to compare myself to. The popularity of the app got us to the point where we were able to get it acquired. This was right after my son's second birthday. So we owned it for less than a year, then ended up selling it. We made a profit on it. So it ended up being that kind of Cinderella story. I still didn't own my story though. And so people started asking me to speak. People started asking me to write. I started a column with Inc. magazine. You can go to damonbrown.com to check that out. And all these things started to happen, and suddenly people wanted to hear my story. And I was like, well, this time, let me be more direct about it. And slowly I came out of my shell. I'm like, yes, it was a struggle. Yes, I woke up at 3 a.m. to handle this startup. Yes, all these things. And two things started to happen. First of all, as I started to share my story, then people started to understand that they were okay. That there was no perfect one type of entrepreneur, one type of creator, one type of way to make an impact. You didn't have to, as I say in one of my books, you didn't have to run away to the circus to make an impact. You could actually be who you are. Most importantly, people saw me and they saw themselves in me. And so the people who were part of the LGBTQ community, people who were people of color, women of color, whatever you were, who didn't look like or act like a Mark Zuckerberg, who didn't look like or act like a Stephen King, no offense to Stephen King, people who didn't pattern match, as we say in Silicon Valley, or didn't have the culture fit, they were able to see me. I was a light for them. Me sharing my story wasn't about me getting comfortable with me, though that was a part of it. It was about me getting comfortable so that other people could see that light. When it shifted to not being about me and looking at my imperfections, to shifting to nourishing the world and showing up for other people so that they could be uplifted, suddenly those insecurities started to melt away. I did a book called The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which is based on the popular Inc. column. I did it in my own imprint, as Amanda mentioned, and it became a bestseller because the traditional publishing industry didn't see my vision. At that point, it was my 19th book, actually 18th book, but they didn't see it. And luckily, I was confident enough in my story and I embraced it enough to say, you know what? I don't need traditional publishing. I'll publish it myself. It became a bestseller. Now those conversations are different. But that required me owning my own story. That's what Bringing Your Worth is about. That's why it's the title of one of my books, Bring Your Worth. It's the title of my publishing imprint. This is what it's all about. That's why I'm showing up here for y'all. And it comes down to 3 basic things. We're talking about bringing our worth. Number 1, you have to understand that everything is a partnership. Doesn't matter about the monetary value or where you're on the totem pole, quote unquote, everything is a partnership. Number 2, it comes down to understanding that you do not and should not wait for permission. Do not wait for permission. Do your thing. And number 3, it comes down to everything and everyone, including you, has a legacy. This is really important, so I'm gonna take a pause here and throw this into the chat. So let's talk about everything as a partnership. As Amanda mentioned, I have a master's in magazine publishing, 2 degrees in journalism, been a journalist for 21 years. If we rewind it back to the year 2000, I just graduated Northwestern, again, my master's, and I was broke and I was unemployed. In fact, the day that I was graduating, my second job offer got rescinded. You go to the number one journalism school in the country, you still can't get a job. That's how rough it was. The dot-com bubble had just burst. When I went to the program, it's a year-long program. I went into the program in 1999. It was, as we say in Silicon Valley, frothy. It was frothy, right? People were doing like $1 million Super Bowl commercials and Silicon Valley was popping. It lifted all the magazine industry, if y'all were around at that time. Again, I'm a big magazine nerd, so I was nerding out on that. But about 4 months before we all were going to graduate, and I had a small graduation class, dot-com bubble burst, I think that June, it was a wrap. It was a wrap, right? I remember going, to this day, again, it's 21 years ago, to this day, I think I'm turning red right now. I remember going home on the L, the train in Chicago. Last day of class, I'm not going back to Northwestern, not going back to Medill, we call it. I had my degree under my arm, very expensive degree under my arm, going back to my overpriced apartment. At least it was overpriced for someone who did not have a job. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? And so, of course, I became a freelance writer, and the rest was history. I've been freelancing since then. So I'm thankful for that moment. Around that period of time, for those first few years, it was ramen noodles. It was rough. I know some of y'all can relate to that. Thank God I didn't have a family at the time because I could barely feed myself. But it was a good time to do that. I was in my early 20s. It was a good time to go through that experience, and I still draw on that today. Around that period of time, there was actually an alumni meeting, which to me, in my 23-year-old brain, I'm like, free food. I'm definitely coming through. So I go to Northwestern. First time I've been there, I think, in 3 months since I graduated. And in the buffet line, I'm not exaggerating, I run into an editor for Playboy. Now, Playboy is a big idea now, but back then, 20 years ago, it was the stuff. And Playboy is based in Chicago. Remember, most publishers were based in New York or LA. To have a Chicago-based, born and bred company, they were running things in regards to magazines, right? So I'm like, oh, snap. Okay. All right. Well, should I ask them to pass the carrots or whatever? But luckily, I didn't nerd out like that. But I realized there are two ways I could approach it. Both of them will be fair, but two ways I could approach it. The first way is I could say, hey, nice to connect with you. Listen, we probably have the same favorite professors, because I'm guessing you just graduated too over the last few years. Man, I love Playboy and I'm broke. I don't know how I'm gonna get home, probably gonna walk. And I don't know how I'm gonna eat. I definitely don't know how I'm gonna pay my rent this month. And wintertime is here too. It's winter in Chicago. Listen, we probably have the same energy. You probably have the same background. I like Playboy a lot. You probably have some pull there. Is there a way I can get an article or something? Just something real quick so I can get this money? Please? Please? Could I do that? So that's one way to approach it, right? You can see where the partnership discussion's coming in. But luckily, that's not what I said. It must have been wisdom from upon high, or I've always had good mentorship. Maybe it was a mentor in the back of my mind that allowed me to show up in that way. And I said, listen, number one, I love Playboy. I love Playboy. My dad loves Playboy. Even my granddad collected Playboy. Back when I visited his place back in Jersey, where I'm from, he had collections of Playboys from the 60s and 70s. I looked through them. I understand the legacy here. And I love Hugh Hefner's work and being very progressive, at the same time being countercultural. That's a tough balance. I know not everybody likes him, but I understand what he's trying to do. However, I understand too that I think he's about to turn 75, if my math is correct. And I know that the peak of Playboy as far as circulation was probably in the 70s. I think it was 72, 73, around the time I was born. And so it feels like that you guys might need a little bit of energy. I'd love to provide that for y'all. You know what I mean? To be able to bring some of that insight. Obviously a young man, I know technology really well. I know sexual culture really well. I'm willing to talk about mores and stuff like that. Those things that people that are my age and a little bit older are interested in. And I love to give some of that energy back into your publication. Listen, I have a couple story ideas I think will work well for you. One in particular, I'm not going to pitch you now. Like, I know you gotta eat your snacks and stuff, but early next week, can I go ahead and email you, or if you want to do a quick phone call? Either way is fine with me. Just let me know. Enjoy your time here. I would love to stay in contact and see how I can support y'all. That's how it went. And about 2 months later, I ended up doing my first piece for Playboy. It was for Playboy.com. It was, of course, one of the first video games to feature sexuality, which is kind of one of the things I studied back in the day, and was the premise of one of my earlier books. That led to me doing regular articles for Playboy, the actual magazine, being a regular freelance writer for them. That led to me doing features with Playboy, which at that period of time was a big deal. That was like my version of the Atlantic or the Smithsonian or even the New Yorker. That was my version of that. And then finally it peaked out in 2012 when Hugh Hefner's people actually called me to collaborate on a book called Playboy's Greatest Covers. It's a hardcover book. If I had been thinking, I actually would have brought it with me at this stage. But it's a hardcover book. It's a beautiful looking book. I'm very proud of it. I actually worked with Hugh Hefner himself. I guess it was like 3, 4, maybe 5 years before he passed away. And so we ended up doing great work together. But then if you put it in reverse, if I said, hey, please just give me a job. Please, you have all the power. Please give me a crumb. Then would Hugh Hefner and his people be calling me and my agent? Would I be doing features for Playboy, getting paid well for that? Would I be doing articles for Playboy? Would I get anything beyond the first couple of small articles and low paying articles I did for Playboy? Would that have happened at all? My guess is no. And so if you feel as though that things are out of whack with, say, an agent or with an editor or with a publisher, or even with your colleagues, think about the roots of that relationship, because they're kind of like a tree. They go down. And then as they go down, they go up. That foundation that I still have with Playboy 20 years later, started at the buffet line when I was a broke writer. And so if you're not feeling that worth and that respect from an agent that you're trying to work with, if you're not feeling that worth and respect from a publisher you're trying to work with, if you're not hearing back from a literary magazine, from the query that you sent them, think about how you're approaching that relationship. That was discussed a little bit yesterday, which made my ears light up. I'm like, yes, this is what we need to talk about. So number one, everything is a partnership. That's how you bring your worth. If you don't show up and apply to these different literary contests, then they can't fund the contest. If you're not sending these manuscripts over to these agents, they're not getting their 15 or 20%. If we don't pitch and write for these magazines, they don't exist. You are a partner in this. Number two, recognize that, recognize that you do not need to wait for permission. You do not need to wait for permission. Now, my favorite pop cultural anecdote comes from about 15 years ago. It's something called the Oprah bump. So, you can give a shout in the chat if you've heard of that. The Oprah bump is basically, again, about 15 years ago, if Oprah mentioned a product or a service or a food, idea, whatever, it would blow up. So people were pushing really hard to get their stuff discovered by Oprah, right? Yeah, I see some of y'all recognize that. And so that Oprah bump, that was probably when she was the queen of daytime talk shows. For some of y'all that missed that, she kind of was Ellen before Ellen, right? But we all have these different variants of that depending on the generation. Maybe like 50 years ago with my grandmother's generation, it might have been Ed Sullivan. It's probably the Ed Sullivan bump. He's, pitching Clorox or whatever. But what they found with the Oprah bump is that it actually wasn't much of a bump. For every product that blew up, whether it's the Cronut over in Midtown Manhattan, I think it's Dominique Ansel. My French is horrible. Sorry, Dominique. With his work, or it's Elizabeth Gilbert with Eat, Pray, Love, and her 11 million books sold, and of course the TED series and all that stuff after that. Those exceptions prove the rule. Most of the time, there was not an Oprah bump. Oprah mentioned thousands of products over the 30 years, 25 years that she was running daytime TV before she started her own network. But people were pushing to get the products to her because they felt like that was the solution. And again, the examples, prove the exception. I can mention Eat, Pray, Love because that book blew up and really started Elizabeth Gilbert's career. But there were like hundreds, if not thousands of authors where you never heard from them again. Or if you heard from them, it wasn't because of Oprah. Now, again, you can replace the Oprah bump with the Stephen Colbert, or when he was on TV, the Jon Stewart bump. There's articles about that if you want to Google it. You can replace that with the Kardashian bump. If they mention something, of course, they usually mention their own products. I've done videos about this on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/BrownDamon. It's genius. You create a product and then you talk about the product on your show, and then it makes the product blow up. It's like this, what's it called, Oribus? It's like a snake eating itself, right? So you have that. Even today with the TikTok influencers. And it's like, if I can get this TikTok influencer to dance to my music, then suddenly it'll be #1 on the charts. It's the same discussion. We're hustling for the wrong thing. Instead of hustling for our audience, we're hustling to get their attention. Now, I have a personal confession. Back when I was much younger, not that much younger, back when I was much younger, I'd have this dream where, let me play it out. It'll be like, hey, yeah. Hey, Damon, yes, it's David. David Remnick, yeah. Yeah, from the New Yorker? Yeah, you've heard it, right? You've heard of it, right? Yeah, totally. Listen, we appreciate your work and we would love to have you involved. So we want to give you the whole next issue whenever you're ready. 40,000 words. Yeah, similar to what we did with 9/11. Yes, like that. But we're going to do that for you. And just whatever topic you want to cover, because we trust your work. And yeah, we just want you to bring your light to this publication because we really need that support. We need that energy. So if we could do like I'm sorry, I'm insulting you. If we can do like $4 a word, if that's okay, but we can talk about that. Listen, just think about it, do it on your own time, but we'd really love to have you in here. And when you get an opportunity, come out to New York, we'll fly you out, we'll take you out for a nice dinner, and yeah, we'll make sure that happens. Right? How many of y'all have had that fantasy? Replace the New Yorker with whatever. Again, with Playboy, with the Atlantic, with Smithsonian, which used to be my other publication with Playboy that I love, but I never got into Smithsonian. We often have this fantasy that we're going to get picked, as Seth Godin would say. We're going to get picked. We're going to be selected. The gatekeepers are going to say, yes. Last night you weren't a poet, but today you are a poet. You are crowned. You're crowned the poet. You're crowned the next hot thing, the next hot shit, pardon my French, as we would say back in the day. It's not going to happen. Just like the Oprah bump, you getting into the New Yorker, like I've had pieces I've written for the New Yorker, but they never ran. They're actually available in a recent compilation I did called the Damon Brown Reader. But I know people who have been in the New Yorker and they got paid well, but their lives did not change. But here we are waiting by the phone. We, including me. Here we are waiting by the phone. Sorry, you tell how old I am. Here we are waiting by the phone. Here we are hustling to get our attention of the Oprahs, or whatever the equivalent of Oprah it is. It could be Publishers Weekly. It could be a book list. It could be whatever. Poets and writers. I don't care. Like you replace it with whoever you're hustling for. Even if they give you permission, that doesn't guarantee success, financially or otherwise. And then who are you hustling for? It's like asking Stephen King what kind of #2 pencil he uses, which people ask him all the time. Like, I don't know him, but he's written about that. Or asking Anne Lamott, which direction she faces, towards the sun or away from the sun when she writes. It's bullshit. It's what Stephen Pressfield would call a resistance in his classic book, The War of Art. It's a barrier. It's why some of us go to grad school and some of us go to law school. It's why some of us wait till our kids are growing up a little bit more, or until we get through our divorce, or whatever the case may be, and then we'll get serious about writing. It's another barrier. It represents fear. F-E-A-R. That's what it is. You waiting for Oprah, you waiting for David Remnick, you waiting for poets and writers, I don't care. That represents that resistance that Stephen Pressfield talks about so beautifully. So the thing is that you're just going to get to that work anyway. So let's say Oprah ends up giving you that approval. Or let's say David Remnick ends up putting you on speed dial. You still got to do the work. And most importantly, again, you're hustling for the wrong audience. Are you trying to please Oprah? Or are you trying to please and nourish the community that you're writing for? Who's going to be around in 20 years? Maybe when you're not around anymore. Let's be honest about it. Is Oprah going to be around? Is David Remnick going to care what you're doing? No. It's going to be the audience that you're nourishing. And that audience ideally will be around after you're not around anymore. That's playing the long game. That's not waiting for permission. Again, as I mentioned, I did the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which Amanda mentioned. I did the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. It became a bestseller. Many publishers rejected me when I came out with it. When I pitched it, I mean, they didn't get it. They didn't believe that y'all existed. They didn't believe that they were entrepreneurs and creatives that were outside of, again, the Elon Musk. They're outside of the Steve Jobs. They were outside of the Jeff Bezos. And a lot of us weren't a-holes. Go figure, right? But they didn't believe that, so I created my own imprint and became a bestseller. Whether it became a bestseller or not, I'm getting the product to y'all. Yep, 7 years later, 5 years later, whatever, the book is still going. I'm still talking to y'all about it. I'd still be waiting on the publishing industry for it. If you're trying to do a book tour and they won't fund you, get on, post-pandemic, get on Airbnb, as I did with my first major book. Airbnb wasn't around, but I did my own version of that with couchsurfing. Get on the road yourself. How much do you need? If it's money, find a different way to fund it or be more lean with it. If it's approval, find people around you that will approve what you're doing, not them. Find that inner circle that's gonna approve that. It makes me think about what Brene Brown talks about, where she has a list of 5 people in her pocket at all times. And then whenever she gets nervous, she pulls out that list and looks at those 5 people. And those are the 5 people she only gives an F about. Think about that the next time you're trying to hustle for your own worthiness, right? So number 1, remember that everything is a partnership. Number 2, think about not waiting for permission. Find permission from something or someone else that you actually cares about what you do. Not somebody out there. They're abstract. They don't care about you. Get approval from your audience. Get approval from the people that you're trying to serve. Lastly, remember that you and everyone has a legacy. Now, I've been a freelancer, like I said, for about 21 years. On my 21st anniversary, I think it'll be this Labor Day. And I found that we fall into 2 different categories. And I would call y'all freelancing too. You know, because if you're creating stuff, you're not sure if you're going to get funding for it, or if you're working with limited funding, you don't have a traditional job in the writing industry, you are a freelancer. Own that, right? Take pride in that. There's nothing wrong with you not being part of the industry. We tend to fall into 2 categories or 2 extremes. The first one I call is the mercenary, where it's like, I'm just trying to get a paycheck, come in, come out, take care of it. I'm a Ronin, I'm a ninja, I am a hired gun for hire. I'm in the classic version of the medieval version of where the term freelance comes from, where I'm a jouster and I have a free lance. And if you pay me well, I'll go and joust somebody, give me my bag, I'm gonna go about my business, right? And then there's another camp. I'll call them the introspectives. And it's like, is this a publication I wanna write for? How am I serving their audience? Are they serving my audience? Is this something that I want to represent me? I know I have this poetry book, and I know that this publisher wants to publish it for me. Each of these poems, each of these words, I think they represent me now, and I definitely represent my past. But do these words represent my future? As in the future, when I'm not here anymore, do these words stand the test of time? Is this something I'll be proud of when I'm not here anymore? If I have kids or aunties or uncles or whatever, is this something that will support them? When people in the community that I want to serve, and I might be part of that community, I might not be, when they read this shit, is it going to impact them? Will it give them life? So there's 2 camps. As you can imagine, we're always in this camp. We're always in the introspective camp. Being in the mercenary camp, it's kind of like gravity. Try jumping out of a plane and saying you don't believe in gravity. See how that works out. Either way, we're contributing. We're creating a legacy. If you're not sure if you're creating a legacy or if you're not sure if you're bringing your worth, it comes down to 4 basic questions. When did you start? Why did you start? What impact did you want to make? And when did you start believing that you didn't deserve to make that impact? I'm going to say that one more time. When did you start? Why did you start? What impact did you want to make? And when did you start believing that you didn't deserve to make that impact? If we're not putting our art into the world, there's only one person who can stop that from happening. If we're not putting our energy out, there's only one person who can actually block that. That's you. That's me. In my book, Built From Now, I quote Jay-Z, and he says, we are culture. Nothing moves without us. Now, he's talking about Black culture, and he's talking about hip hop, which I'm intimately a part of. I used to be a hip hop writer myself, but I think that applies to things much bigger than that. He's talking about the energy of the world. He's talking about the artist. He's talking about you. We are culture. We move the culture. I recently heard a quote, and they said, poetry is considered fluff until your heart is broken, and then it becomes a lifeline. Poetry is fluff until your heart is broken, and then it becomes a lifeline. My dual question to you is, with your art, what lifeline are you carrying? And most importantly, with you not doing your art to your best, to your most, what lifeline are you withholding from other people? As you bring your worth, you have to recognize first that art is power. And that comes from recognizing everything is a partnership, recognizing that you do not need to wait for permission. No one can give it to you anyway. And lastly, that everyone, including you, especially you, has a legacy. If we recognize that art is power, then it's about time that we all use it. Thank you.